let's start everything from the beginning. John and Tara were married in 2010, less than a year after they met each other. Now, as I mentioned in the previous episode, Tara is almost 30 years younger than John, which is a pretty big age difference no matter how old you happen to be. I only met Tara one time at a family dinner, same with my wife. She talked unprovoked for a large portion of the time about her former high-level security clearance and government credentials. She claimed to have worked with or for the FBI, NSA, CIA, and pretty much any government entity you could possibly think of. Very strange, definitely not the kind of conversation you normally hear around the dinner table, but considering we didn't actually know her grandfather very well at that point, even Nikki, my wife, was not very involved with her grandfather at that point, it wasn't really cause for concern, or at least enough for us to really say anything to anybody. We did, however, on the way home, exchange quite a bit of conversation, trying to figure out exactly what the hell had just happened, because that was unlike any dinner or family get-together we had ever been to. It'll make a little more sense as we talk more about Tara. Now, Tara had always acted extremely hostile and jealous towards John's children. There's, of course, my wife's mother, Dory's sister, Stacy, and John Jr. Tara did not like the fact that John was close and in constant contact with all of them, and in fact, she would constantly strain the relationship between all of them to the point where finally, she called them and said, "Your father no longer wants to hear from you, and you are not to come around anymore." This, of course, left all of his children absolutely devastated, and is a big reason why they weren't able to figure out more of what was going on, more of what we're going to get into in these later episodes, because they simply had no access to his life at that point. She had completely shut him off, and, regardless of whether you think someone like John at his age being duped by a beautiful young woman, much younger than he was, is wrong, if that's on him. Regardless of the morality, just the fact that she would come in and cut off his connection to his children out of pure spite, essentially, well, that's definitely cause for concern. It should also be noted, too, that her children do not talk to her, despite what you may read on some of her Facebook updates, what she says, even including in her deposition, that she does happen to talk with them. This is not actually the case. Her children are not active in her life, and, again, you're going to figure out a little bit more of this puzzle to piece together for yourself as we move forward. Tara became involved in the Believers Tabernacle Church, which is the church that John had been a pastor over for the better part of 50 years. She really had no formal training, no formal ministry experience, but due to the fact that she was involved with him, the pastor of the church, she managed to sort of force her way into the church leadership. Now, this put a tremendous strain on the other ministers who had served and worked alongside John for quite some time, mainly due to the fact that she was encouraging policy and she was encouraging a direction that they did not feel was what best suited the congregation. This led to a rift, and this rift eventually culminated in a large number of the congregants leaving, led by one of the most respected members of the congregation and a longtime friend of John's, Tom Holt. Tom Holt actually became the leader of a new church that still exists to this day. He was also a very respected member of the Believers Tabernacle Church while he was a member. In fact, I would say if one had to just throw some sort of comparison of his status and the respect that he had out there, it was probably rivaled only by John himself when it comes to people that were given the authority and the respect within that congregation. I had a chance to talk with Tom, and he gave me a few interesting pieces of information. He remembers Tara saying, quote, "I can get any information on anyone I want as a result of my high-level security clearance." Now, Tom notes that she only spoke this way in a threatening manner in response to someone else saying something that she did not like or someone else challenging her authority. Tom said everything about her seemed fake, but because John and her were married, everybody tried to maintain some semblance of respect for her. I'm sure if any of you have been in similar situations before where you respect somebody but maybe have some issues or some suspicions about a person that they're with, you know that maybe you tend to let those slide a little bit out of respect for the person, thinking they must know something that I don't. I'm going to trust their judgment on this. Tom also has a daughter named Vicky, who was very close to all the members of the congregation and very involved in the church at that time. Vicky has cystic fibrosis, and she remembers one time Tara text messaging her and saying, "You should feel lucky for every day you have," as a threat, letting her know not to trample on her territory, not to speak up against her, and not to challenge her authority that she was rapidly developing within the church congregation. Tara threatened Vicky multiple times after that, to the point where Vicky actually went to the Clearfield police and got them to talk to Tara about staying away from Vicky and not contacting her. Definitely not the actions of somebody trying to put the church congregation first, and as I mentioned, this eventually led to a massive split where a number of folks who had been members of John's congregation for years, we're talking decades, decided to leave. It was a painful decision for all, and between Tara fracturing the relationship between John and his children and fracturing the relationship between him and his congregants, a large number of the people in John's life were simply no longer there, and unfortunately this allowed Tara to fill the void even more. Lee Dixon was the second in command of Believers Tabernacle for quite some time, John's assistant pastor. When Lee noticed that Tara was working her way into church leadership and trying to actually take over from within, leading the congregation in a direction that they did not believe was godly or the way to go, he intervened and called Tara, quote, a Jezebel. Now, as you can imagine, Tara did not like this very much, and she responded by viciously attacking Lee twice in public Facebook posts for the entire congregation to see. When Lee decided to try to actually make up with her and, for the betterment of the church, for the betterment of the congregation, move forward as friends and not enemies, Tara once again viciously responded to him. Lee actually showed me the messages that she sent back to him as a response to him being the bigger man and saying, I'm sorry, for John's sake and for the congregation's sake, let's try to work this out. As a response to all of this, Lee left the Believers Tabernacle Church, a very painful decision for him since he had devoted so much of his life to it. It didn't stop there for Lee, though. Tara, in her ever-present vindictive nature, decided that she was going to take Lee's fate into her own hands. And while Lee was working at the Susquehanna, I think that's the right way to say it, prison as a chaplain, it's a military prison, she actually wrote a letter, or at least we know of one letter, and was actually able to convince the prison management to fire Lee, to let him go. Which, if any of you have met Lee, which I know you haven't, is absolutely horrible. Lee is one of the kindest and most gentle-hearted men out there. But unfortunately, as a result of Tara, again, that vindictive nature I talk about, Lee was actually fired from his job. Once again, she claimed another victim. Lee told me in retrospect, what surprised him the most was the speed of everything. Tara came into John's life, they were quickly married, and before anyone else could blink, she was already a major authority figure within the church. This left a lot of people, including Lee and Tom, really no time to plan or react to what was happening. And as I mentioned, eventually this led to a split where Tom left and started his own church, and Lee decided to step down. Now, up until this point, Tara had still been on John's side at the very least. Though she was causing turmoil in other aspects and areas of his life, they were still, quote-unquote, the happy couple. This is where things took a turn for the worse in July of 2014. Tara, completely unannounced and unexpectedly, claimed that John was trying to kill her by virtue of loosening the brake lines on a car that he had recently serviced so that she could attend a church conference. John was, of course, shocked by this allegation. Not only did he not mess with the brake lines, he thought he was doing a nice thing by making sure the car was serviced, the oil was changed, the coolant was changed, and all that other jazz. Tara throwing this allegation at him out of nowhere was unbelievably confusing, and it hurt. After throwing this allegation, though, out, she almost immediately left John and moved in with a former Believers Tabernacle congregant named Hope Martin, who had left the church during the fracturing that she had actually caused. Hope now attended the Phillipsburg Church of Latter-day Saints. That'll come into play in just a moment. I had an opportunity to speak with Hope as well, and my interview with her was probably one of the more helpful in this entire investigation. She was able to shed a great deal of light on Tara's character, as well as a lot of the things that happened after she left John, leading up to the PFA that was placed on him. Hope worked for years as a code enforcement zoning officer and building code inspector for Clearfield County. She was respected. She still is respected. This isn't some random Jane Doe. This is an upstanding member of the community and a dear friend of John's for many years who had to make the painful decision to leave the Believers Tabernacle as a result of the decisions that had been made. The first thing Hope told me she noticed when Tara moved in with her is that she did not seem interested at all in mending things with John. In fact, it was quite the opposite. She seemed very happy to finally be free of him, and there was absolutely no mention of reconciliation or trying to work things out. Now, I don't want to make this into something that is overly religious, but if somebody who is high, or at least attempting to become a high-ranking official within a local church, one of the most virtuous positions a person can take is trying to restore their marriage. The fact that Tara did not even desire to begin restoration, let alone give any attempt, I think speaks a lot to her motives and her motivation. Hope gave Tara her bedroom, as many good hosts would do, but she noticed something very peculiar. Almost immediately, Tara had went through all of her possessions, and more than that, she took pictures of the entire house. Now, I'm not talking walk into a room and take a snapshot. I'm talking comprehensive reconnaissance-like photos that actually allowed her to lay out a map of the entire house so she could see where every single item was and always know when something had been moved. Now, Tara told Hope, like she's told everyone, about her background as a high-ranking government official, her high-level security clearance, and basically the fact that she worked in areas of government where reconnaissance would be something someone would do on a daily basis. I'm not speaking to those claims as though this is any proof or certainty, only that it is extremely suspicious. And I don't know about you, but I've had people come to stay with me before, and they did not take pictures of the entire house so they could map out an entire layout or a blueprint of the residence. Hope said John was continually visiting Tara, as kind-hearted as ever, and trying desperately to mend their fractured relationship. She said it deeply saddened her to see how much John still loved her and still wanted to be with her, despite the fact that Tara had no intentions of them staying together. He brought her food from the garden that they had originally planted together and worked on. He brought Hope money as a way of saying thank you for allowing Tara to stay there where they tried to work everything out. But Hope says when John would come to visit, Tara was exceedingly cruel and mean, often telling him to leave and that she did not want to talk to him at all. This is where things take a turn for the bizarre. That's right, folks. If it wasn't already bizarre, this is where it gets downright disturbing. One day, when John had came over, as he often did, dropped off food, gave Hope money, and left, Tara did something extremely peculiar. She turned to Hope and said, "Can you believe he just screamed at me and threatened me like that?" Hope, of course, taken completely off guard, had no idea how to respond. She had been in the same room, in the same house with Tara. They had both seen the same thing happen, which was John coming in and acting loving, acting kind as he had every other time. But for some reason, Tara was claiming that's not what happened. Hope, of course, finally, after gathering her bearings, said, no, that didn't happen. To which Tara responded, no, you must not have seen him, it did. And in fact, regardless of Hope's protests, Tara continually, and this became a pattern with visit after visit, would try to convince Hope that John was screaming at her, that he was threatening her, that he was going to hurt her, that she was fearful for her life. All the while, Hope was becoming terrified for hers. This erratic behavior in her house was beginning to leave her more and more uneasy about Tara staying with her. And this behavior actually expanded into not only times that John had actually visited, but Hope said they would be sitting in the living room with one of the windows open. And all of a sudden, Tara would point at the window and say, "Look, there he is. You see him shaking his fist at me? You see him wagging his finger at me? Look how menacing he is." I only use these words, I only use these descriptions because this is actually what Tara was saying to Hope. Hope, of course, at this point is outside of her mind, trying to figure out what is going on, as Tara is attempting to convince her that things exist that do not exist. Finally, after much of this behavior, and realizing that her life may very well be in danger due to Tara's unstable nature, Hope's son decides to intervene and tells Tara that it's time for her to leave. Coincidentally, a few days prior to my interview with Hope, and this would of course be months after all of this activity had taken place, years actually, a couple of years, Hope's son had the police call him, saying that Tara had reported him for stalking. Now, if that's not crazy enough, here's the situation surrounding that incident. Had no idea when or where Tara had seen him. It turns out, after asking the police officer to elaborate, the one who called him up, he had been at the same dollar store as Tara. He hadn't seen her at all, but apparently she was there, and she snapped photos of him in the store, and then reported him to the police station as having been stalking her and harassing her around town. I thought this spoke to the character of Tara, the unstable nature, and the fact that she would simply use these allegations to build cases against anyone, so that if at any point in time she needed to, she could point back at a mountain of false evidence to say that they had indeed been harassing her for a long period of time. It was around this time as well, while Tara was staying with Hope, that John's PFA, Protection from Abuse Order, was filed against him. Remember in episode 1 when I introduced you to Warren Mikesell, formerly of Mikesell & Mikesell, a private legal firm where Tara had served as legal secretary, and Warren Mikesell, having served as an assistant district attorney under both current presiding judges in Clearfield County, was the one who actually helped Tara to file the Protection from Abuse, a clear conflict of interest. At the actual hearing, John was forced to stay outside of the courtroom, as Tara said that she was too scared for him to be in there and would would be unable to function if she had to be in the same room as John. John's attorney, Stephanie Cooper, came out of the courtroom and told him to sign this document so you don't go to jail. John at this point is, of course, thoroughly confused and believes his lawyer is looking out for his best interests. He signs the document, thinking that he's signing not guilty to any charges that Tara is trying to bring against him. John didn't even know until a few weeks later when the protection from abuse order arrived in the mail that he had agreed voluntarily to a restraining order that would eventually become the bane of his existence. Now, I tried to obtain a copy of this hearing, seeing as John was not allowed in the room in the first place. I thought it would be beneficial to this investigation to hear exactly what had went on behind closed doors. Unfortunately, due to the nature of PFAs being domestic hearings, I am not, even with the Pennsylvania right to know law, at liberty to obtain a copy of that information. It would have been nice if I could have read it. Hopefully John will be able to request a copy of that in the future to read exactly what went down. As we conclude this episode, it is fair to ask, why wouldn't John sign the divorce papers at that point? His wife was clearly no longer interested in reconciling their relationship. She was beginning to turn his life into a living hell. Why wouldn't he just sign the divorce papers and be done with it? Well, there's a few reasons that I haven't touched on yet, but as we wind down this episode, I'd like to throw them out there so things become a little clearer and you find out exactly what is at stake. You see, while they were together, Tara racked up $83,000 in debt, mostly on credit cards. John did not want to be stuck with this bill, and as evidenced by his actions of bringing her food and paying Hope Martin money while she was living there, he was still hoping to work things out, genuinely. He also knew that if he and Tara were to leave one another, that his status as a minister would be called into question as well. Remember that whole point I made earlier about a person in ministry, especially a high-ranking local church official, wanting to preserve their marriage and do everything they could to fix it. This, of course, was on John's mind, though it was not on Tara's. In fact, one of the last things Hope said to me was John was always extremely gentle with her. You could tell he genuinely wanted to work things out, and he was willing to forgive her of everything. This includes the PFA that she had filed against him, the claim she had made that he was trying to murder her by loosening the brake lines on her vehicle, and all of the other terrible things she had spread around town and police reports that she had made about times he hadn't even been present, but she claimed that he had threatened her. Thanks for listening to this episode of Corrupt Clearfield. Remember, you can follow along with all of the documents I'm referencing at corruptclearfield.com. Just scroll down and click the link to the Dropbox file. All the documents are cataloged in order as they appear in each episode. You can also help to support this investigation as it continues, and also our family as we attempt to recover from the damage that has been done. You can donate either by going to corruptclearfield.com and clicking the link as you scroll down the page, or you can go directly to paypal.me/CrazyGaby. That's my broadcasting alias. Again, that's paypal.me/CRAZ as in zebra, YGAB as in Bravo, EY. Thanks for listening. Until next episode.